this feeling of not doing enough, the feeling of not doing things right, making decisions perhaps in life where we feel that we're messing up our child.
Somehow having a kid is such a big wake-up call that you are forced to throw light on a lot of assumptions that you have made on yourself. And it becomes more difficult to say, I'll think about this later. No, you have to think about it now. And that is never comfortable.
For parents to feel that sense of regret after having a child, wanting their pre-baby life back.
Because on the one hand, you feel this intense sense of love for the child and wanting to do anything for the child. But at the same time, your 30th floor, your 32nd floor have already made other plans.
Supposing you're getting dopamine through holding your child, and you're also at the same time, you have the opportunity to get a dopamine by being up on a stage and giving a keynote speech.
How suppressed emotions can actually lead to physical symptoms. And it is not acting. It is not something that she's doing it on purpose.
Hi, Siddharth. Great to be in conversation with you.
Hi, Sonam. Thank you. I am really excited to, be part of this conversation. I'm glad that we got in touch. I'm glad Abhish actually made that effort to get us in touch.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Should we start with, just giving a brief introduction of ourselves, just so everyone knows where we're coming from and why we're having this conversation? Would you like to go?
Yes. Sure. So I am Siddharth Warrier. I'm a doctor. I am based out of Mumbai. I'm a neurologist and I've been practicing in the private sector for the last 2 years. And before that, for the last 15 years, I've been in a medical college. I was undergoing my residency. I did my MBBS, my MD medicine, and then my super specialization in DM neurology. And for the last 1 year, since lockdown began, as happened with all of us, life takes very unexpected turns, and I found myself making these videos on neuroscience, and before I knew it, I was a YouTuber. And that's where I find myself today. I'm collaborating with a bunch of people. I'm exploring neuroscience in multiple different aspects, and today is a great example. We are going to be talking about motherhood, and that's not a topic that I even thought about exploring, but thanks to you, now that's all I can think about.
Wow, what an incredible journey. First of all, I think with everything that you've been through in the last few years, and this is creativity, right? And expression of ourselves in every manner. And it's so lovely to see that you're creating this content and, whoever it touches.
Thank you, Sonam. I want to know about you. Can you tell me a little bit about you?
Sure, happy to. So I am a certified mindfulness teacher and life coach. That's what I currently do. Last 6 years, I would say, been working in the mental health, mindfulness coaching space. So this is my third career. I was working in the sustainability space before this, and I have an undergrad in economics. So I did some of that work before as well. So I've been working for a while across different continents, and I'm now based in Singapore for the last 8 years. And I think just very similar to your journey, all this while doing a lot of physical work at corporates, at schools, working with people through workshops, being physically present. But with the lockdown, I think, again, accidentally started creating stuff for my own daughters, and that led to, creating a whole bunch of other content. So totally resonate with that journey. And I think just to, if I were to sum it up as to why I do what I do, the interest, and I keep thinking about this and, keep modifying what this means for me and this journey means for me every few months, I would say. But essentially interested in enabling the optimization of life based on the awareness of ourselves, the awareness of our environment. And then with that optimization that, we realize, seeing how perhaps we can show up as a force for good in the world. And this applies to me, this applies to, this intention comes through, I see, even with the folks that I work with, whether it's with children or with adults. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
That's incredible. The fact that you're able to put all this together, and it's not easy doing this whole online business and balancing it with everything else that you have going on?
Yes, and that's the intention, right, of talking about the realities of what it looks like. Because I think a lot of people reach out to ask, how do you do this, and I think that's where the perception comes in. So I think it's my responsibility to bring out all the challenges, all the difficulties, all the sacrifices that come along the way in being able to do what we do. And then also draw it back to the fact that it's a very conscious decision each person makes. So it's not for everyone. Different things work for every person. And I think that's why I felt that examining, perhaps from a neuroscience lens, where this mother's guilt, really comes from, what the reasons for it may be, and let's get into setting the context of how we thought about this conversation. I think for me, just defining what is this emotion of mother's guilt, this feeling, I would say, and it's abstract, right? This feeling of not doing enough, the feeling of not doing things right, making decisions perhaps in life where we feel that we're messing up our child, the feeling of perhaps not being that ideal mother that we envisioned prior to having the child, feelings of letting the child down, letting your family down, whether it's you taking care of yourself, feeling guilty for practicing that self-care. I think there's just so much of guilt around, even aspects around. Sometimes motherhood does get boring, it gets monotonous, it gets stressful, but not being able to accept that freely. It's also not very uncommon, I've seen, for parents to feel that sense of regret after having a child, wanting their pre-baby life back, and there's so much guilt associated with all of these emotions arising. So that was my backdrop as to why I wanted to understand from you, how do you see it from a neuroscience perspective?
So the best way to understand a topic, I feel, is to try and make it personal, because that immediately gives you a reason. Why should you care about this?
Yeah.
And I started off thinking of my mom. And because and this is a general advice to everybody who wants to learn or read about any topic, make it personal. Immediately the way you look at the topic changes. So my mom is someone who has studied music, and she's a music teacher. She teaches Carnatic music, which is the South Indian classical music, and along with that, she balances being a homemaker. She used to take my classes. She used to teach me, my younger brother, help out dad with the hospital, and there are so many roles that she plays. Now that we have two grandmoms at home, both of them old, she has to manage their medicines and managing their mood swings. Lot of different hats that one person has to wear. And if if it was a if it was at a corporate job, such a person would have gotten a lot more recognition. That how can one person manage so many different roles? You don't see a CEO also designing and also doing marketing and also doing sales. There are different people for every one of this, but somehow a mother in the context of a family is managing things that require such diverse skills. And the fact that she's able to do it, when I started thinking about this, I realized that the whole problem comes from identity. When you are playing one role, so if I were a footballer and I'm on the match, I'm on the field and I'm playing football, all my skills, all my neural networks are guided towards me being one thing. So everything is in sync, there's no conflict. But while I'm playing football, if I also have to solve a maths problem, neither of them will work. My energy is diverted. My energy is quite literally, there are different neural networks that are both requiring energy, that are both requiring blood supply, that are both requiring oxygen. Right from that basic level, whenever you are having to perform two roles at the same time, you feel a little split. And वो दो का जब चार होता है, when that two becomes four roles, you become even more split. And when I think of moms feeling guilty, I immediately think about the identity crisis that they must be going through, especially today, in today's times, because we don't grow up with that concept of being a mother. Nowadays, what I instinctively feel is that till a particular point, men, women are thinking in almost parallel terms. And then suddenly there is this huge biological, hormonal change that happens that makes a shift in that entire paradigm. And somewhere that conversation isn't happening as to how to deal with it now. What happens next? And it's not an easy conversation. I have to admit, it's not an easy conversation to have. But I feel that something like this, what you and I are having, can be the basis of that. If we can just figure out how to even make this conversation more accessible to people, that would help just unravel this identity crisis.
Yeah. And that is so interesting. And
is that something you have felt? I'm sorry if this is too personal, but
no, absolutely. I think you bring up such an important point. And I haven't, of course, been able to articulate it in this manner, but I think this is something that comes up very strongly. And one doesn't know how to make sense of it because you naturally have a very strong identity that you've built up, likely with the way that you've been parented. And most of us are, right? We've been parented to grow up as an independent person, very similar, like you said, to any other boy. And then how do you make sense of these additional roles? And we haven't reached a point in our society where those roles are equally being managed by men, right? And then there's also the biological conversation around the fact that women have to bear the child, and there's certain things that only a mother can do. So it is complex. You know, if we talk about identity, is then the question that we need to have a singular identity, and if not, if we have several identities, now how do we manage that? So I think that brings me to to the fact of the causes are several, right?
Yeah.
I think there's so many things that cause this mother's guilt, and some of it is the internal dialogue that we have with ourselves, and that internal dialogue is a result of our own narratives, and also the narratives that get formed as a result of what we see around us, of our environment, of society, and all of that. So I think the projection that mothers should look like this, mothers are supposed to feel like this, mothers should be like this, they should be doing this, all the shoulds and the supposed to, and it doesn't help, right? Because you're already carving out a specific definition or a picture of what that role should look like. And so the expectations are put from society, media, friends, family, and a lot of times they're unreasonable expectations of say even happiness that a mother is expected to experience, even though we know postpartum depression, anxiety, all of these are very real. And then elements of comparison, then that gets external, right? How we tend to, there's peer pressure, there's comparison that, and personal insecurities, I think, that come about with social media, with pressure from friends and family, and even, recommendations when we see professionals in this space. And I tend to face this a lot. I work with parents around mindful parenting, and one has to be conscious, right? Even recommendations made by doctors, by organizations, can sometimes lead to feelings of inadequacy in parents, in mothers. And then there's also the element where parenting, you jump into the parenting journey with existing mental health conditions. There could be past traumas that are unhealed. How does one, make sense of some of these causes, so to speak, of where the guilt may be coming from? Does that make sense? Siddharth, I don't know. I know it's a lot I'm putting out.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. When you tell me about it, the image that I get are of a building getting constructed, but it's not one person with a master plan building the whole thing. It's different people coming in at different times and adding different elements. So somebody comes and builds a pillar. Somebody comes and adds a wall, a door. and one whole other group of people will come and add an entire floor. And that is how our identity is built. It's not a we don't go into life with this perfect plan of action that this will lead to this, this will lead to this. We we are actually a patchwork, like a mesh of different ideas, different influences from different people. And the ironic thing is that we don't accept this. We still like to think of ourselves as this really well made product, that where no conflict should happen, everything should fit in beautifully. And every time we are reminded that that is not the case, we are not so well put together. We are actually almost random things tied together with shoelaces. That is what our identities are sometimes. Whenever we are reminded of that, that brings with it such a feeling of threat, that now what if all I am is these very random things put together, then how do I survive as a human being? We constantly tell ourselves that is not true. In the case of mothers, unfortunately, there is a very sudden wake up call. Because when we will get to this in a bit, that we can live in a lot of denial, or we can live in a lot of false stories. But somehow having a kid is such a big wake up call that you are forced to throw light on a lot of assumptions that you have made on yourself. And it becomes more difficult to say, I'll think about this later. No, you have to think about it
Yes.
now. And that is never comfortable.
Yeah, I could not resonate with this more. Uh, I think the personal transformation I underwent after having my first daughter was
Yeah.
so significant, and always really enjoyed this process of personal transformation. So for me, the reason I even wanted to have my second one was that, this is just a bomb of an opportunity. I will not get this chance for such a, like you said, right? You have no choice. And this happened with the pandemic. I think people experienced this as well. You had no choice but to look at your thoughts, your emotions, who you are, what your value systems are, what matters, priorities, cutting out stuff that doesn't work, and you have no choice but to do it. And but if you go through that process effectively, I think it's fantastic. But then, this it I realize that it takes a lot. And I also, while I talk about this side of it and how it's been so fulfilling, I think there is also this realism around what it took. I think it took a lot. It took for me to really enjoy this process to be then able to benefit from it. But a lot of people don't, and that's fine. So I think there needs to be a lot of dialogue around how tough it is as well. And it's not easy to do that. And it's probably not for everyone, or probably not everyone's choice or decision and all of that. And I completely respect that. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I think it's fantastic what you bring up.
One thing that really makes me feel that neuroscience is an important aspect to this conversation is that we are literally talking about a conversation between a primitive part of the brain and a newly developed part of the brain. And we don't think about it in those terms, but having a child is such a ancient biological drive that we are still not completely, we haven't still come to terms with how those drives are affecting our everyday decisions. And like I said, if you think about it as a building, we as society currently with social media and all of that, we are making the, say, the 30th floor or the 31st floor. So whatever identities you are forging today is sort of on the 30th or 31st floor. The decisions relating to pregnancy are coming from the first floor. Below that is just your basic life functions, where to eat, where to sleep, how to survive. That is on the ground floor. First floor pe pregnancy aata hai. And
Yeah.
everything else is built on top of that. And obviously the decisions that are coming from such a primitive space is going to affect everything else beyond that. And that is why this is such a complicated topic, because those pregnancy related or childbirth related decisions have actual biochemical effects. And it's a cascade phenomenon, or it's something called as a waterfall phenomenon. So one thing leads to another, one thing leads to another, and it is a series of chemical changes that end up all the way down. So by the time it reaches the 32nd floor where you are currently, you will wake up feeling sad or happy or upset or focused and not be very sure why. Because it's difficult to backtrack it. It's difficult to reverse engineer the whole process unless you know it. And a lot of times this is why there are mood changes. A lot of times this is why there are feelings of frustration or guilt, because you're not able to fully explain why do you feel like this. If you knew it, if there was somebody coming into your door and shouting at you and you're annoyed, that won't make you feel guilty, because there is a very clear cause and effect. You deal with the problem, you solve it, you can move on.
Correct.
That is how we deal with all our problems. And that is how we expect ourselves to be. We think that we are logical people. You show me a problem, I will solve it and I will move ahead. Which is why this mother's guilt is not similar, because we are not able to find the root cause. And there this whole conflict comes in.
Yeah, and a question is coming up for me. When you talk about this first floor, are you saying that this is embedded in our biological desire, need to have a child, and we're negotiating that with the new brain, so to speak, and that's where the confusion comes in?
Yes, in the simplest terms, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Wow, indeed. And so then would it mean that this is exclusive to women? Would you say that? Or I'm not sure how we see that.
No, not really. That biological drive to procreate is there in everyone, which is why there is so much of biological energy spent on making sex feel good, because otherwise there is no need for that to happen. So there is a hormone called dopamine in the brain, and this is fundamental to understanding human behavior, because every time you do something which is associated with dopamine, it is like your biology giving you a thumbs up, saying do more of this. And
Yeah.
every time there is no dopamine, it's a sort of a punishment. So if dopamine falls, it means you don't do this. If dopamine increases, it means do this. And that is how we are trained to behave. So every time you do something that gives you social validation, it gives you dopamine. So you'll do more of that. And sex is associated with a lot of dopamine. And
Got it.
the reason so much dopamine, and it's not cheap. Making dopamine is not cheap. So your body has to spend a lot of energy making that. So why would it put in all those resources into it? So for both men and women, that fundamental drive is there towards procreation. This comes way before. So like I said, first floor.
Got it.
This comes way before social drives, morality, right and wrong. All of that comes maybe on the 15th floor. So that basic drive is there. And then there are some differences. Beyond that basic drive, between men and women, there will be some hormonal differences, which one of Abhish's favorite hormone is oxytocin.
Yeah.
And that is more in women, less in men, but of course plays a role in both. And that is what leads to bonding. So as soon as you have a child, the oxytocin level in the mother just goes through the roof. And there is a very intense sense of bonding with the child primarily, but also with the whole world.
Got it.
Because oxytocin does tend to give you that sense of, social togetherness. And that's one of the things that leads to mother's guilt. Because on the one hand, you feel this intense sense of love for the child and wanting to do anything for the child. But at the same time, your 30th floor, your 32nd floor have already made other plans.
Yeah.
You want to say you want to travel, or you wanted to, work harder, get a promotion. All the things that you had decided right before this oxytocin went up. Now, where does the dopamine go? Because you don't have unlimited dopamine. The dopamine can only go into one place. So if you go for the job, you will get dopamine, but all this oxytocin is going to be disappointed. And if you go for what the oxytocin is telling you to do, then the job is going to be disappointed. And it is literally coming down to how much chemicals you have to spare.
Oh my God, this is mind blowing to understand it in this manner. I think what you're saying is so real, but just being able to understand this at the brain level, and with biology, I think it's amazing. So one is the negotiation, or like you're saying, which chemicals are there to spare. But also this angle of negotiation that happens. I don't know, and if it does, between the old brain and the new brain, like, can there be a negotiation, or is it, what can we change in this dynamic, and what's non-negotiable or a given for us in terms of our biology? Like, how do you make sense of this?
At one level, it is non-negotiable. There are certain things that are non-negotiable, that oxytocin will go up. Unless there is a pathological problem, there is something wrong with the chemical itself, then it might not. But otherwise, assuming a normal physiology, oxytocin will go up because it is part of childbirth. Dopamine levels will go up every time a mother looks at the kid. It's not negotiable. And so the mother will feel happy every time she picks up the kid, unless there are pathological changes. So sometimes you mentioned postpartum depression. And of course, the circuitry is very complex. There are a lot of chemicals coming in the way. But again, when I'm talking about a normal, say 95% of cases, every time a mother looks at a child, she gets a dopamine spike. The same way that you might get a dopamine spike when you open up Instagram, or when you meet a friend after a long time, or when you win a race. That same feeling a mother gets every time she picks up the kid. So just like how you would keep wanting to turn towards social media, it becomes an addiction. And this is the fundamental basis of addiction.
Yeah.
That you want to keep doing something. Yeah.
Yeah. And so would these levels of dopamine and oxytocin vary from mother to mother? And also there could be other ways in which this could be counter impacted, or I don't know, like you said, which chemicals are there to spare. So supposing you're getting dopamine through holding your child, and you're also at the same time, you have the opportunity to get a dopamine by being up on a stage and giving a keynote speech. Does that then come to a position where you make that choice as to, I don't know, I'm just trying to understand this in the simplest way. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, and I'm glad that we are approaching the topic of mother's guilt from so many different angles, because this is how complex this topic is. It does deserve all these different perspectives. There is another hormone called serotonin. And there is an area in the brain, which is in the developed part of the brain, so at the front, which is called as the prefrontal cortex, which is where you take your decisions, your logical thoughts, your calculations, all of that.
Yeah.
There is an area there it's called ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And that is very rich in serotonin receptors. And what that area does is it helps you prioritize. It helps you give a value to everything. So if you look at a phone and you look at your car, which is more valuable, which is less valuable? If you look at two friends, who are you close to, who are you not? I'm just giving you examples. Of course, it's not very, very exact. But when push comes to shove, what is more, what is less, what is the value that you place on something is kind of decided in that area.
Right.
And this is extremely subjective.
Yeah.
Because it is everything that is in the new brain is very subjective.
Right.
Everything that is in the old brain. So the further back you go, the less subjective we become. So we all start off from the exact same point. So if you go from your spinal cord up, our spinal cords are all the same. All of us have the exact same spinal cord. If you touch fire, your hand will go back. That is a spinal reflex. There is no difference in the way your hand goes back and the way my hand goes back. Right?
Yeah.
And if you go up into your brain stem, which is the lowermost part of your brain, that is where you breathe and your heart is beating and where you feel hungry and all that. Exactly the same. Sabka same hota hai. Koi farak nahi hai. And then as you keep going forward, some amount of differences come in. So how much pleasure eating gives you, how much pleasure sex gives, how much pleasure or how much fear is associated with the dark. Here, there will be some differences. Maybe some people are more afraid, some people are less afraid. So this is the primitive part of the brain. And then once you come into the prefrontal cortex, everything is different. So your entire personality is different from mine. There may be nothing in common. What you value and what I value may be entirely different. And this is decided by your life experiences, the people that you have spoken to, the books that you have read, how people have treated you or how you have treated people. That decides everything in the prefrontal cortex. So here it is completely subjective. So the value that you put on something is entirely yours. So if you put more value on the keynote speech, there will be more dopamine attached to the keynote speech. And so you can kind of make that justification.
And that makes the guilt lesser? Yeah. Does that reduce the guilt?
It should, if it is this clear cut.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I like to keep it so clear to explain it. But in the brain, you can imagine 1 billion neurons talking to each other, with 1 trillion synapses. So the synapses are the meeting points between neurons. So 1 trillion synapses constantly active. It is not so clear. It is not so A leads to B leads to C. So you could say that, yes, it should reduce guilt if it is that clear cut. But a lot of times you will do something and then the oxytocin will kick in and then the value of it may reduce in retrospect.
Yes, so true.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, and this happens, right? In the moment, the decision seems so clear, and exactly as you said, retrospect, there is that guilt that shows up again. But this is very interesting, right? For me, even in the mindfulness work that I do, we talk a lot about strengthening and enabling the prefrontal cortex, because that's where the executive decision, making happens. And to a large extent, if that is taken care of, we're likely making decisions or at least compromises that to some level we're comfortable with. And like you said, logically, that should reduce some level of the guilt. And this is a personal experience as well, right? As I meditate, spend more time gaining more awareness about who I am, what I value, what kind of price am I willing to pay for the choices that I make in life, the more I wouldn't say it's easy, but it gets more comfortable making those choices, knowing why I'm doing it. And that brings me to the point that, whether we are comfortable or not, or what we decide with respect to our parenting journey, does it come down to this negotiation that we have between, like you said, the non-negotiables, the primitive brain, which everyone experiences in the same manner, and then the new brain? So for example, and then that's the subjective part, right? So when the non-negotiable part interacts with the subjective part, that's where people's choices may differ, and the extent of guilt, extent of any kind of emotion might come through that negotiation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. There is an area I won't go too deep. It's called the cingulate cortex. And the cingulate cortex is kind of responsible of doing this balancing act. So on the one side of the cingulate cortex is the old brain, on the other side is the new brain.
Yeah.
And the cingulate cortex has the responsibility of deciding what handling conflict, basically. To put it in very simple terms, the
Yes.
cingulate cortex handles conflict. And every time you see a choice, your cingulate cortex is the most hard-working part of your brain at that moment, because it has to talk to every part of the brain, deciding what is this thing, how much value is this thing have for me, how happy will it make me, how angry will it make me, and therefore what should I do, how should my behavior be. So all that comes as part of conflict resolution. Now, the problem with parenthood and all of this whole discussion is that to be happy, now we can say that happiness means dopamine going up.
Yeah.
And if that is all you want, it's very simple. Just do what your primitive brain tells you to do. And you will be happy, because that's how the brain is designed. So if your brain is telling you have a child, have a child. Let the child grow up. You will constantly get dopamine kicks and you will be happy. It's not so simple, because now that we have evolved our prefrontal cortex and we have come up with our own dreams and aspirations, they cannot be put away. So I am unfortunately coming to this conclusion that maybe happiness is not the goal. Because
Yeah.
you do you feel that sometimes, or is that too weird a statement?
No, go ahead. I want to complete your thought. I want to hear all of it.
All right. My theory is that we have developed such diverse parts of the brain that now doing all of it is going to be difficult. And whatever dopamine that you are going to get you're going to get it very long term. In the short term, it is much more likely that you will be constantly be facing conflict after conflict after conflict. Because that's how we have maneuvered ourselves into. That's the chess position that we have maneuvered ourselves into. That different parts of the brain wanting very, very different things. So they're not in sync with each other. And once you accept that this is how my brain is, and the likelihood of me finding global happiness, finding all parts of my brain very satisfied with my behavior, is less. It's not going to happen. There will always be some part of my brain disappointed in me. I find it much easier to move ahead then, because now I'm no longer chasing happiness. I am doing things because I know that I have to give time to everything, even if it doesn't make me happy. And eventually, what happens is they slowly start coming into sync. It doesn't have to be at once, because the one drawback of listening to the primitive part of the brain is that all your future thinking capacity is in the frontal part. So your primitive part cannot plan ahead. For your primitive part, if you're not happy now, you're never happy. It's here and now. It's now or never. So everything, if you're not picking up your baby right now, then you are worthless. If you're not doing the keynote right now, you're worthless. Either way, you will always miss out on something. So if we are going to be evolved human beings, then we have to trust the forward thinking part of the brain and believe that even if the primitive brain can't see it, trust me, it's going to get to a place where all of you are going to be happy. But for that, we need to have a lot of peace of mind, logical thinking. We have to know where we are going and make decisions in a way that they fall into place eventually, and not be constantly disappointed that why am I not happy today? Why am I not happy today? You're not going to be happy right now.
Yeah.
It's biologically not possible. That's not the position that you have kept yourself in. Something like that.
Yeah, no, I completely resonate with this. And I think there's a lot of confusion also about what happy is and, how people look at happy. Is it, um, is it peace? Is it equanimity, which is, just being at peace with whatever be the situation, right? And we tend to look at happiness as joy and smiling faces. And, if you really look at happy in terms of understanding the realities of what you're going through, I think building in some sense of acceptance around the fact that this is how it is, and these are, the trade-offs, the compromises, or the sacrifices being made. But like you said, I think it all irons out, and it's not about having everything at the same time. And I think the other thing that you brought up is that we tend to constantly look at the outcome and look at the goals and try and see whether we've met them in very quick intervals. So on a daily basis, we are taking decisions and we're checking whether we've met our goal. Are we happy? Are we happy? As opposed to taking, like you were saying, a more long-term approach to things and how things eventually do iron out and we get to a place where we're comfortable. So I think just being comfortable with discomfort, being comfortable with things going the way that they are, and that equanimity, if one calls it, could bring in that peace and comfort with the way things are. So no, absolutely. I think I broadly completely resonate with this. You can't be in a happy. It's not possible. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lovely line. Be comfortable with discomfort. That's really. I remember the story of Amazon and how the first 15 years of their growth, they were hugely negative. They would keep getting investors, but they would just keep putting it in. They would keep putting all the money back into research, into growth, but they were in negative profit. They were in severe loss. But that's how you grow.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you book your profits, you are done. What next? You've taken the money, but that is not going to do anything for you. So that is what happiness is. Happiness is booking your profits.
Yeah.
But wait for a bit.
Yeah.
That's what delayed gratification means.
Yeah.
Don't book your profits yet. Let it keep growing, and eventually you're going to get there. There's going to be a bonus.
Yeah.
But if you're very quick to cash out, you are not allowing your brain the time it needs to figure things out.
Correct. Yeah. And that's the challenge, right? There tends to be a lot of this generic overarching advice around, don't compare yourself, even if you're doing it subconsciously. Have the confidence in your own decisions for what seems right for your family. Be mindful and intentional about the mindset that you have, the behaviors you have, but easier said than done. It's like we are talking about, how complex this is. And it's very hard. It's very hard to make sense of, sometimes it involves looking into your own childhood, healing past traumas. How are these patterns showing up in the way that you parent? Is it, going back to your own childhood? Like we spoke of, I think understanding who it is that we are, what our value systems are, priorities are, and that requires active investment in time to do the self-inquiry work or the self-awareness work. It's not just going to happen by itself. So what does one do? Like, what are your thoughts on, and then there's so many things, right? Learning to say no, setting boundaries. Like, how does one think about all of this from at the level?
Yeah, if you give names and titles to every pattern of behavior, sometimes it's a lot to remember.
Yeah.
And then you feel like you're juggling some 25 different balls at once, and obviously they are going to fall down. I think we can start with the very basics and say that just as important as it is to say I'm not chasing happiness, right next to it is this hugely important caveat that says I have to stop being afraid. Because those happiness and fear are very closely linked in the primitive brain. And as soon as that is the engine, that dopamine amygdala complex. So amygdala is this part of the brain in the limbic system that is dealing with threat. So every time you feel something that you're threatened by, your amygdala is the one that is activated on both sides. And dopamine, the dopamine network is what drives you towards something, and amygdala drives you away from something, to put it in very simple terms.
Yeah.
Now, as soon as you say that I'm not going to let happiness be the source of my motivation, unless you handle the fear part of it, you will be not going towards something, but you'll be running away from something.
Yeah.
Which is even worse.
Yes. Get it. Wow.
So, yeah, you have to, and you have to consciously deal with it, because it's that is your baseline state. Fear is a baseline state of human beings.
Yeah.
We may accept that or we may not, but we are all, almost every single thing that you do from morning to night is actually guided by something you're afraid of. With this huge threat of mortality in the background of everything. Everything we do is motivated by our fear of death. On top of that are several smaller fears, like fear of bad breath, which is why you brush, fear of, so on and so forth, fear of social rejection, fear of what will my colleagues say, fear of what will my son think, fear of everything. There are 1,000 different fears playing in that playground of our minds all the time. And it's very, very important to just come to terms with that and let your amygdala activation go lower and lower and lower until you're at a place where you're not motivated by fear.
Yeah. And the decisions are, and the actions are also not driven by that, the emotional space. I think it has to come from the PFC.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Again, and I think this requires work. There's, you can't just sit and expect that you will not react and you will be able to effectively respond. This needs conscious work. So, of course, this is the work that I do with mindfulness, and this is exactly how it changes the structure of the brain, right? We've, you were aware of that. How can someone think about this from a perspective shift? Say if that were a start. Any advice around that? I mean, my immediate, I think, of course, instinctive solution, so to speak, I take it to mindfulness, because you're really rewiring the brain, right, at a fundamental level when you do that practice. But say if someone were to just start off thinking about things differently, is that a possibility? Can brain structures start to change with that?
It can. That's the most optimistic thing about neuroscience, I think, that because neuroplasticity never goes away. It's maximum in childhood, when you are a teenager, and it starts slowing down a bit at 25, 30, 35, but it never really stops. And it slows down at different rates for different people. So people who are very curious, or artistic people, or people who are looking to see new patterns, their brains will always be more in tune for neuroplasticity. So when something happens, they will be able to cope with it better, because coping is basically just changing the way you look at things.
Yeah.
That's what coping is. And when you change the way you look at things, what is happening is your neurons are rearranging themselves. So this is plasticity of fluidity, as opposed to rigidity, which is your brain is just one cement block.
Right. Yeah.
And so it literally cannot absorb shocks. If there's a shock, it'll break. Whereas if a plastic brain can absorb a shock and rearrange itself and just, take that trauma and build a cocoon around it.
Correct.
But a rigid brain cannot.
Yeah. Okay. So it's possible, but I think it also involves, then what I'm hearing is that you need to know where you're at in your own journey, your own disposition to some of this internal work that may be required as part of it.
Right. Uh, in your mindfulness classes, uh, do you explore this aspects? Do you explore this aspect of the brain? I mean, from a neuroscience perspective, I'm curious.
Uh, I mean, not in terms of teaching neuroscience, but definitely in terms of being able to explain what happens at the brain level. Because this is one of the most powerful research outcomes that have been seen with mindfulness, is that it is rewiring and restructuring the brain. And of course, I teach mindfulness from an evidence-based perspective. So the practices are designed all such that they lead to that impact. And given that it is such an important outcome, we do explain how the PFC is strengthened, our executive decision making is strengthened, while our reactivity is tamed. And being just able to explain that, I think most people are not looking to dive deep into neuroscience as such, but just being able to understand how that impacts them, right? If it's a parent child relationship, if you're able to take that pause in that moment and not react and lash out and be angry or whatever the emotion may be, you're just able
Yeah.
to somewhat have a better reaction, or response rather, right, in a few moments of time, or in a few hours time. So it depends on the context of the situation. So I think just
Yeah.
being able to understand that. And we're always making decisions, right? We sometimes think that decisions are big in terms of life decisions, career or marriage, but honestly, we're taking a decision, should I make this call, should I schedule this for later? There's such mini decisions that we have to take on a daily basis. And if you can just get more effective with that decision making process, you are enabling yourself at a very fundamental level, right? And it shows up that that work that you do in developing that state in practice shows up as a trait and a disposition in your day-to-day life, and how you just respond to life as such. So it's, of
Beautiful.
course, the work is so important, but I also see that it is challenging for people to maintain that consistency in practice. And of course, that's the work that I do in trying to make it as simple as possible, with something that isn't as fun and interesting. But yeah, definitely address this in small bites. Yeah.
One thing that I have noticed is when we are talking of mother's guilt, we have to talk of suppressed emotions.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, this suppressed emotions comes out in the form of actual physical problems. And this is an important aspect to this conversation that should be addressed, because a lot of women have somatic issues like body pains and headaches, and they will test everything, they will undergo all the you know investigations, and all of those will come normal,
Correct. Yeah.
and those complaints get dismissed as either it's actually they could be called just hysteria. Oh, this woman is just
Yeah.
overacting or
Yeah.
pretending, or she's trying to get attention. But this that reaction stems from a fundamental lack of understanding as to how this can happen, how suppressed emotions can actually lead to physical symptoms. And it is not acting, it is not something that she's doing it on purpose. Your brain does take all those conflicts
Hmm.
and literally divert them from the emotional space of the brain towards the side of the brain that makes you feel physical symptoms.
Well,
And this is not understood well.
yeah, absolutely.
So whoever is listening to this conversation, this this knowledge has to come that emotions, your state of mind and the state of your body, these are not independent things. They're all connected, and if your body is sick, you will feel low, and that is very easily understood. Nobody has a problem with that.
Yeah.
But people seem to have trouble grasping that it can very easily be the other way around also. So if you're
And
feeling low, if you're feeling guilty or depressed, your body could have physical symptoms.
this is so powerful, and I'm so glad you brought this up. because there is a lot of shaming around being allowed to feel the emotions that we do, whether it's during pregnancy, postpartum as well. And because of those suppressed emotions, like you said, it has physical manifestations that don't look great. And then there's judgment even to that, right? How does one understand this biologically or from a brain perspective? When you are going through those emotions, of course, we encourage them to feel the emotions that they are, but then there is this side to it that if I'm feeling negative, it's going to impact my child, whether it's after their birth or during pregnancy. How do we encourage mothers, or at least give them the confidence, from a biological perspective, as to the impact that they're feeling, which is very normal to feel the emotions that we do. Being able to feel it, process it, get past it is an effective way, and the impacts to the child may, I don't know. This is something I'm asking you. Is it better off? Is the child better off in that circumstance? While if a mother suppresses the emotions, how would that manifest for the child's well-being?
The most important thing to reassure the person is that in it is reversible, and that if handled properly, there is not going to be lasting damage. So one of the fears that people have is that I have screwed up my life, or I've screwed up my child's life.
Yeah.
But that is a very, very gross overreaction. It's not, and ironically, the fear of screwing up your whole life is what does the maximum damage.
Yeah.
So the most important thing is to assure them that whatever it is, maybe the next 1 week is going to be difficult for you. Maybe the next 1 month is going to be difficult for you. But you have enough support. We are all there for you. And we will go through conversations, we'll go through counseling, we'll go through medications if needed. But it is going to get resolved. And 6 months later, 1 year later, 5 years later, when you look back at this time, it's going to be a bad memory, but that's all. It's not going to have lasting damage, and your child is not going to have lasting damage. Because everything can be corrected, everything can be made better. And once that, like I said, that once your amygdala activation goes down, everything else gets easier to handle. It's always more difficult to solve anything or have a conversation when there is this huge alarm going in your head. They're not listening to you. They're not hearing anything you're saying. As long as that amygdala alarm is going on, they can't process what you're saying. So the first step is to just reduce that level of fear. Once that is solved, then we can have an actual conversation, solve their actual problems. They themselves will be able to hear their own thoughts better and understand, why am I feeling like this? What is their source of conflict? So identifying the source of conflict is the next challenge, followed by conflict resolution.
Correct. Yeah.
But they can't identify the conflict until the smoke is cleared. Correct. From amygdala.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that it is more effective to acknowledge and to receive the emotion as it is, deal with it, and if at all there is some impact on the child, that is something that is reversible, and it's not the end of the world. And it's the mother is probably better off doing that, as opposed to suppressing their emotions, not feeling it, letting it build up, and then having physical manifestations, one for them, and then the impact on the baby as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So of course, every situation has to be handled by its own merits. Correct. So every family will be different, and every situation is going to be different. But as a rule of thumb, if the mother is unwell, she will not be able to look after the child properly. So the priority has to be looking after the mother. And the child, if assuming that the child is okay physically, the mental needs of the child are actually much lesser than the mental needs of the mother.
Got it.
So we tend to think about the child in a very different way. And as a species, our oxytocin level goes up when we see a child and we feel like, well, oh, let's protect the child, let's protect the child. And that's fair. But if the mother is not well, eventually the child will suffer. So protect the mother.
And this brings, what I was mentioning earlier regarding self-care, the guilt that mothers have in taking care of themselves, and they will they will push themselves to their limit to take care of everyone else and their child, and not take care of themselves. So I think this is counterintuitive based on what I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There is a sense of like extreme heroism. That it's me against the world. I have to protect my child at all costs.
Is this
So
biological?
it's a bit, it is.
Okay.
So one of the negative aspects of oxytocin is that whoever is inside the oxytocin bubble is all mine. Whoever is outside is a potential threat. So as much as I love the child, that much will I hate somebody who might even potentially harm the child. And so you feel, there's a bit of that soldier attitude that I will die to save this person, which is very romantic and amazing, but it's not practical in the long term because you're not in the jungle. You're not trying to jump in front of a cheetah who's killing your child. You are actually dealing with a neighbor or somebody commenting on something. So you might take a lot of anxiety where it's not really required. And that anxiety is coming from a very primitive space where you are in the jungle and you have to protect the child against huge calamities.
Yeah.
But your brain doesn't remember that.
Correct. And I think this is the aspect around the overactivation of the amygdala that we are experiencing in today's times, right? A lot of it is just getting triggered where it's not meant to be getting triggered. And I think amygdala is not all bad. We need it to protect us, but, again, doing it in moderation, right? And where it's needed. Siddharth, I have a lot of things coming up for me. I know we are at time, more than time. How are you feeling about it?
I think this was, I think this conversation requires a part 2.
Yeah.
Definitely.
All right. So let's pause this for now, and I look forward to coming back with you on this topic for more.
Yes, lovely. Thank you so much, Sonam. Thank you so much for joining me on this talk. I'm looking forward to talking to you soon.
Awesome.